Namaste and good morning. Welcome to the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and our Sunday morning discourse. I'll begin by chanting the full Devi Suktam, which is from the 10th mandala of the Rig Veda, the first expression that we know of in the world of the Advaitic non-dualistic realization, which came to a woman, a great rishi, sage named Vak. Her father also was a great sage, but she was the first to attain to the state of Advaitic realization that is recorded in history. So these are her words of her expression of realization, which came to be recognized as the basis for the idea of God as mother. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om Aham Rudrebhirvasubhischaramyahamaadityairuta Vishwadevaihi Aham Mitra Varuno Bhabibharmyahamindragni Aham Ashwino Bha Aham Somamahanasam Bibharmyaham Tvashtaramutapushanam Bhagam Aham dadami dravinam havishmate supravye yajamanaya sunvate Aham rashtri sangamani vasunam chikitushi prathama yagniyanam Tamma deva vyadadhuh purutra bhuri sthatram bhurya veshayantim mayaso annamatiyo vipashyati yah pranitiyaim shrinot yuktam amantavo manta upakshiyanti shrudhi shruta shraddhivante vadami Ahameva swayamidam vadami jushtam devebhirutamanushebihi yang kamayetantamugrang krinomitam brahmanandan rishintam sumedham Aham rudraya dhanuratanomi brahmadvishesharave hantavau Aham janaya samadang krinom yahandyava prithivi avivesha Aham suve pitaramasya murdhan mamayo nirapsvantah samudre Tato vitishthe bhuvananu vishvotamundyam varshmano pasprishami Ahameva vata iva pravamyarabhamana bhuvanani vishwa paro diva para ena prithivya tavati mahina sambabhuva Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om. So in translation that says, I travel, that is Vak speaking from her state of identity with reality itself. I travel with the Rudras and the Vasus, with the Adityas and all the gods I wander. I hold aloft both Varuna and Mitra, Indra and Agni, and the pair of Ashwins. I cherish and sustain high-swelling Soma, and Twashtar I support, Pushan and Bhaga. I load with wealth the zealous sacrificer who pours the juice and offers his oblation. I am the queen, the gatherer up of treasures, most thoughtful, first of those who merit worship. The gods have established me in many places with many homes to enter and abide in. Through me alone all eat the food that feeds them. Each man who sees, breathes, hears the word outspoken. They know it not, yet I reside in the essence of the universe. Hear, one and all, the truth as I declare it. I verily myself announce and utter the word that gods and men alike shall welcome. I make the man I love exceedingly mighty, make him nourished, a sage, and one who knows Brahman. I bend the bow for Rudra, that his arrow may strike and slay the hater of devotion. I rouse and order battle for the people. I created earth and heaven and reside as their inner controller. On the world's summit, I bring forth Sky, the Father. My home is in the waters, in the ocean as mother. Thence I pervade all existing creatures as their inner supreme self, and manifest them with my body. I created all worlds at my will, without any higher being, and permeate and dwell within them. The eternal and infinite consciousness is I. It is my greatness dwelling in everything. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. And so let me mention also that this is the translation by Ralph Griffith, who was an early scholar in Sanskrit who translated much of or maybe all of the Rig Veda. And so this is not a modern translation made to suit modern Advaitic sensibilities. This was written by one who himself was not a follower of the Vedas, but just a student of Sanskrit or a scholar of Sanskrit, and one who helped to present the Vedas to the world public. So the talk this morning is in the series on small Vedantic texts, a series that I began several months ago. We've taken various texts so far, and this one is on the Chandi, also known as the Devi Mahatmyam and the Durga Saptashati. So these three names, all of them are significant. The name Devi Mahatmyam, by which the scripture is known, is the greatness of the goddess. It means the greatness of the goddess. The Durga Saptashati means the 700 verses pertaining to Durga. And the Chandi is named after the goddess herself, where the name Chandi is used for her in the text that we're going to study. And so the text is named after that name of the goddess. And Chandi, the Sanskrit word, comes from a Sanskrit adjective, chanda, which means fierce, violent, cruel, terrible. And so that's a strange name for a goddess, but it means that she who is terrible to her foes, terrible to those who are the forces of darkness, to the forces of evil. And so Chandi, is considered to be the goddess of truth and justice, who manifested on earth to establish dharma. And so the Chandi, the text, which tells the tale of Chandi, the terrible goddess who came to destroy the demons, it has often been compared to the Gita, and there is a direct comparison that can be made. The difference between the two, let me first state that, is that in the Gita, even a newcomer to the Gita reads it and gets something that is the truth is sort of clearly expounded in the Gita. The story is secondary. There is a story, the story of the battle of Kurukshetra, but that's sort of the framing or the context for the teachings. And the Gita in the main is full of the highest teachings on the various paths, the path of action, the path of knowledge, the path of devotion, the path of yoga. So the teachings are highly accessible in the Gita. Though being the highest teachings, one can study the Gita all one's life and still not come to the end of learning from it. So the initial reader, the first newcomer to the Gita, gets something, feels that they've understood something, and a great sage who reads the Gita finds even more meaning every time the sage reads it. And so the Chandi is more obscure than that. The story is dominant. The teachings are many fewer. But on the comparison side, First of all, an insignificant comparison is that the size is similar. The Chandi has 700 verses, and the Gita has somewhere close to that, less than 1,000. I forget the exact number in the Gita. But they are similar in size. And the idea of the Gita is that Sri Krishna reveals himself as the incarnation who had been born to establish dharma. And here, the Divine Mother is not born of a human family like Sri Krishna. So in that sense, she's not an avatara or an incarnation of God in a physical human form, but she manifests here on this plane to fight the forces of darkness and to establish dharma. The Gita is set in a heroic setting on a battlefield, and the Chandi also, the whole Chandi is full of battles of the Devi with the demons, with demonic forces. At first, to a person not familiar with the Hindu tradition or not very familiar with it, and especially not familiar with the Devi tradition, the tradition of the worship of the goddess, the worship of God as mother, it seems strange because it's so full of bloody battles. And what kind of scripture is this that tells all about the mother cutting off heads and cutting off arms and stabbing and splattering blood and even drinking blood and so forth? It's quite gory. But as Swami Swahananda used to say, he would say, "Do you want a namby-pamby mother, or do you want a heroic mother?" So Durga is a heroic mother, she who can vanquish all evil, who can destroy all obstacles. And so the God as mother in the Hindu tradition is often presented as heroic in nature and all-powerful. That's why she is identified with Shakti. That is the power of the infinite, the power of the divine. The divine manifests in many aspects. The divine manifests as just the transcendent, silent, utterly other reality, where there is no world, there are no beings. There's just the silent, non-dual reality, which is absolute awareness, infinite bliss, and infinite existence. But God also is the source of the whole universe, and that the power through which this universe manifests. So the goddess is especially identified, not exclusively, but especially identified with the power which manifests as this universe and as all universes and all levels of being. She's also the transcendent. She's also the silent Brahman, the transcendent beyond time, space, duality, causation, everything. But she's also the power which manifests as this universe. So the Chandi comes, or the Devi Mahatmyam, again, I'll mix these terms up, but it all refers to the same, Chandi, Devi Mahatmyam. This text, which again exists in several English translations, but it's a fairly small book. Many people read it every day as an act of devotion. Some of you knew Swami Tathagatanandaji, who was for many years head of our Vedanta Society of New York, where Swami Sarvapriyananda now lives and resides, and now heads the center. So he used to read this every morning. The whole text he would recite every morning. And when I first went to Ridgely Manor to take charge of, to start the retreat there, Swami Swahanandaji told me, because he realized it was a huge task and a very difficult task. We had no money, we had nothing, we had no devotees, and we didn't have help from other centers. We were on our own with a huge gargantuan task. And so he said, read the 4th chapter of the Chandi every day. That the 4th chapter contains the essence of the whole Chandi. And there are other people who chant parts of it every day, and some who chant parts of it or the whole on certain days of the month or certain days of the week. Tuesdays and Saturdays traditionally in India were sacred to the Divine Mother, and so those are days when people often chant the Chandi if they don't do it every day. So it comes from the Markandeya Purana. The Markandeya Purana, as I said last week in my talk on Durga, the Markandeya Purana is one of the oldest of the Puranas. It's non-sectarian. There are very few invocations of a particular deity. Its basis is non-dualistic. It's founded on the non-dualistic Advaita tradition, and it emphasizes the path of knowledge, but it also contains this beautiful hymn to Durga, to the Divine Mother. It has 137 chapters, and chapters, let's see, I want to make sure I get the number right, chapters 81 through 93, those 13 chapters make up the 13 chapters of the Chandi. So it's interesting that the Sikhs have a secondary scripture after the Guru Granth Sahib. They have a secondary scripture called the Dasam Granth. The Dasam Granth, and that is based on the Markandeya Purana. The Markandeya Purana is recognized as the source for the Dasam Granth of the Sikh tradition. So in the Purana, again, one of the Mahapuranas, one of the 18 great Puranas, and one of the oldest of the whole vast Puranic literature, in this text, the sage Markandeya, who was a great sage, an illumined soul, who's recognized in other scriptures as well. Here in the Markandeya Purana, the Purana, which is the relation of the great sage Markandeya, he's teaching his disciple Jaimini, who is the founder of the Purva Mimamsakas, the Purva Mimamsaka philosophy. And in the Chandi, which again forms a part of that text, there he is teaching, Markandeya is teaching his disciple Krasushtuki Bhaguri. Krasushtuki Bhaguri, his disciple. And we'll come to that in just a moment. So it's the oldest text exclusively devoted to mother worship. Again, in the Vedas itself, there was the idea of God as mother. There was the Devi Suktam, which I chanted at the beginning, the Durga Suktam, and many other references to God as mother, the development of the idea of Aditi, God as mother, the mother of the gods, who is identified with the infinite, with the absolute. And so there's a great tradition of Devi worship, but this is the oldest text which exclusively is devoted to God as mother, and which develops the idea of God as mother. Modern scholars, modern Western scholars in particular, who tend to post-date everything they can to the latest date. They look for the earliest manuscript they can find and say, well, that's when the text comes from. But that's not an honest way of dating a text. That's just when you know that there was a manuscript or a mention in some other text of the text which has a date. So they date it to the early centuries of the Common Era, that is the Christian era. But it quite likely goes back much earlier than that, because, again, the Markandeya Purana is one of the oldest Puranas. And Swami Vivekananda, at the end of his life, was doing some research, and he never told on what basis, what he was studying that gave him this conclusion. But he was convinced that the Puranic literature, that the basis of the Puranic literature went back before the time of Buddha, and certainly not after the time of Christ. So, in the coming to the Chandi itself, in the Chandi, again, Markandeya is speaking to his disciple Krasushtuki Bhaguri, and he tells him about how Savarni came to be the 8th Manu, ruling over a Manvantara. Now that requires some explanation for most of us. There's the idea in Hinduism, of course, in all of Hinduism, of cyclic creation, that there are cycles of creation. The universe comes into being, it exists for long, billions and billions of years. Even at that early time in ancient history, the Hindus had this idea that the universe continues for billions and billions of years, and it's vast in extent. It wasn't like the universe as conceived in the Middle East in the Jewish tradition, and later in Europe in the Christian and Islamic traditions. But the universe was vast in time, vast in extent, in space. And so, in that cycle of creation, between creation and then the dissolution of the universe back into a seed state and then creation again, in that one period of creation, there are 14 Manus who, one after another, come and rule over a period of creation within this long eon of time. And so Markandeya tells his disciple, Krasushtuki, that I'm going to tell you about how the Savarni came to be the 8th Manu, ruling over a Manvantara, a vast, long period of time. And so then that's the way that the Chandi begins. That the way that it begins is typical of many Hindu texts. A very interesting device that they used. There was that a sage tells a disciple that I'm going to tell you this story, and then begins telling a story. So the story begins with a sage telling a story. So first you have the whole story, and then within that the sage is telling a story. And in that story, he tells about someone who's telling someone else a story. And sometimes within that, there's another story and another story. So you have the whole story, and then this story being told, and within that, this story being told, and within that. And each one is a vast story. But you get that idea of the depth of time, and the idea that this whole universe is nothing but stories within stories. That this universe is the dream of Brahma, and we are dreaming our own dreams within this dream of Brahma. So they're dreams within dreams, they're stories within stories. So Markandeya tells Krasushtuki that I'm going to tell you the story of how Savarni came to be the 8th Manu. And so he says that in the era of the 2nd Manu, again, within one huge cycle of creation, within the era of the 2nd Manu, the one who was to become Savarni was born as the king Suratha, Raja Suratha. He had a kingdom. He wasn't an emperor or anything, but he had a kingdom. And in his kingdom, he was a powerful king. But he, through various circumstances, he acquired some enemies. And the enemies were weaker than he was. They began to fight in battle against him. But because of the machinations of his own ministers, his own unfaithful courtiers and unfaithful army, the enemies, a much weaker force, were able to defeat his forces. He was abandoned by his own people, and he lost everything. He lost his kingdom. And so he wandered out into the forest, and he comes into the forest, and there he sees he's going to the forest because he knows that in the forest the great sages live. And so he wants to go to a sage and ask for understanding. So he meets there a Vaishya, a merchant, and they begin to talk. And the merchant tells him about how his business was flourishing, but then his wife and children turned against him, and he lost all of his wealth. And so both of them find themselves in the same position. They had been in their own spheres, people of power and influence, happy with their lives, and then their own people. In the case of Suratha the king, it was his courtiers, his ministers, and his army who turned against him. And in the case of Samadhi, the name of the merchant, it was his own wife and children who turned against him to take everything he had for themselves. And both of them find that they can't let go in their minds of what they lost. Suratha the king is still worried about his kingdom and what is happening. Who is going to feed my elephant, my prize elephant that I loved so much? Is anyone going to care for him? He may be going hungry. He may be mistreated. And what is happening to my court? What is happening to my palace? And so he's lost everything, but his mind is still concerned with all of these things. And then the Samadhi, the merchant, his worthless wife and children, they abandoned him, took everything he had, turned him out. And he's worried about them. Who is going to take care of my wife now that I'm gone? Who's going to take care of my children? Are they okay? The worthless people turned him out, and yet he can't stop worrying about them. And so they both decide, let us go, that there's a sage here in the forest named Sumedhas. Let us go to him and ask him for the way out of this plight we find ourselves in, where we can't let go of that which not only let us go, but drove us out. But we can't stop worrying about the very worthless people who turned against us. Now that may sound to some like a far-fetched story. It's not at all. One person that I know, a very dear friend of mine, he was in the same situation. He came to one of our centers in exactly the same situation. He'd been a lifelong Vedantin, but he came to one of our centers for help because he found himself in the same situation as the merchant Samadhi. His wife and daughter took away the house he had inherited from his own father. He took care of his father, and his father died and left him. The only thing his father had and left to him was his house. His wife and daughter took away his business that he had built up, took away his house, took away everything. And so suddenly he's without anything. And yet he couldn't stop worrying about the wife and daughter who had taken everything from him and thrown him out. So he came to one of our centers asking for help. The same situation as Samadhi. So this is like the Gita, based on an actual situation, facing the terrors of battle. So this is an actual situation where people, the very people who have betrayed you, you can't stop worrying about them because of attachment. Yet we, in our ignorance, we think, no, it's because I'm unselfish. No, it's not unselfishness. It's just attachment. And so that's the lesson of the Chandi. As the Gita, the main message in the Gita is non-attachment. So the central lesson of the Chandi, as far as what we have to do, is non-attachment. It also teaches, as the Gita does also, it teaches about the power and glory of the divine being. But it teaches us that we have to develop the power of non-attachment. So the Medas Muni, when they come to, when Samadhi and Surata come to Medas Muni, he explains to them that humans, like animals, are attached to their children and to others. Now that also sounds awfully cynical and negative, that even in the scriptures, and Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother, they praise, and Swami Vivekananda praised the mother of a love for the love of a mother for her children and so forth, the unselfish love of a mother. And yes, that's true. So it's not speaking against that. What it's speaking of is selfish love. It's that which causes us misery. It's that which doesn't allow us to let go when we have to let go. There are times in life when we have to let go of something. It's gone, and yet we can't. The mind keeps going over and over and over the same thing, the same question. Why me? Why me? Why did they do this to me? And we just can't let go long past the time when we should have let go. And that is because of attachment. That's not unselfish love. That's attachment. And so Medas Muni begins to tell them the story of the divine Mahamaya, that which deludes all of us. That's another strange thing about the goddess tradition in India, is that we worship the Divine Mother, who is the source of our very illusion, the source of our delusion, the source of our attachment. That's what we worship. Why? Because she who has deluded us also liberates us. And so by praying to her, then we're liberated from the very delusion which she has, that she is the source of. And so the Raja, Surata, he asks Sumedhas when he tells them about Mahamaya, who is this Mahamaya? And so then Sumedhas begins his teaching. And he begins by telling the story of two demons, Madhu and Kaitaba. Madhu and Kaitaba, their story, let me read a little bit of it here. I'll read just the English because there's not time to go from Sanskrit to English and Sanskrit to English, etc. And I'll read from several different sections in the remaining time so you get a sense of the text to those of you who are not that familiar with it. So the Rishi said in answer to the question, she, Mahamaya, is eternal, embodied as the universe. By her, all of this is pervaded. Nevertheless, she incarnates in manifold ways. Hear it from me. When she manifests herself in order to accomplish the purposes of the gods, she is said to be born in the world, though she is eternal. At the end of an age when the universe was one ocean, and the adorable Lord Vishnu stretched out on the serpent Sesha, part of Hindu mythology, and took to mystic slumber two terrible asuras, demons, the well-known Madhu and Kaitabha, sprung into being from the dirt in Vishnu's ear and sought to slay Brahma, the creator. So this is an interesting thing, that everything has come out of the divine. But these two demons, they also were born from the divine. But in this mythic story, it said that they were born from the dirt in Vishnu's ear. Now, don't ask questions about how dirt got into the Lord's ear. But again, this is a story. And it has meaning. Again, the idea is that even the demons come out of the divine being. And so Brahma, the father of beings, was seated on the lotus that had come out from Vishnu's navel. So in the story, as most of you know, Vishnu is asleep on the cosmic waters, Vishnu representing the Ishvara, God, the supreme God. And out of his navel grows a lotus, the lotus opens, and there is seated Brahma, the creator of the world, a secondary deity. And so seeing these two fierce asuras or demons, and seeing the Lord himself asleep, and with a view to awakening the Lord, then Brahma, with concentrated mind, extolled Yoga Nidra, that is the sleep of yoga, that is delusion, that was dwelling in Hari's eyes. So not that God, Hari, that God is subject to delusion, but it's that the Yoga Nidra, the sleep of yoga, which allows Vishnu to go into cosmic slumber, where he's aware only of the absolute. And it's that same Yoga Nidra which puts us to the sleep of delusion. So Brahma extolled Yoga Nidra. The resplendent Lord Brahma extolled the incomparable goddess, Yoga Nidra, the queen of the cosmos, supporter of the worlds, the cause of the sustentation and dissolution alike. So here you see that you're beginning to get teachings about the nature of God as mother. And then Brahma gives a beautiful hymn to the Divine Mother. I'll chant just a couple of verses so you get a sense of the sound of the Sanskrit. Brahmovacha Tvam swaha tvam swadha tvam hi vashatkara swaratmika sudha tvam akshare nitye tridha matratmika stita Arthamatra stita nitya yanucharya visheshatah Tvameva sa tvam savitri tvam deva janani para. And like that, it goes on for a number of verses. I'll read a little bit of it here. Brahma said, "You are Swaha and Swadha. You are verily the Vashatkara and the embodiment of Swara." So these are different Vedic mantras which are used in the yajnas of the Vedic times and later in our present day puja. So meaning that you are the power within the sacred mantras. You are nectar, O eternal and imperishable one. You are the embodiment of the threefold matra. I won't explain, that's too esoteric. It's important, but too esoteric for now. By you this universe is born. By you this universe is created. By you it is protected, O Devi, and you always consume it at the end. O you who are always of the form of the whole world at the time of creation, you are of the form of the creative force. At the time of sustentation, you are the form of the protective power. And at the time of dissolution of the world, you are the form of the destructive power. You are the supreme knowledge as well as the great nescience, the great intellect and contemplation, as also the great delusion. The great Devi is also the great Asuri. That is demoness. You are the great goddess and you are the great demoness as well, meaning you are everything. You are knowledge and you are ignorance as well. You are the power of creation, you are the power of destruction. You are life, you are death, everything. Let me just come to one other I wanted to see if I can find it right now. Yes, here. Armed with sword, spear, club, discus, conch, bow, arrows, slings, and iron mace, you are terrible. You have all of these weapons to slay the demons, and at the same time you are pleasing. Yes, more pleasing than all the pleasing things, and exceedingly beautiful. You are indeed the supreme Ishwari, the supreme goddess, beyond all idea of high and low. So you are the most pleasing of all pleasing things. People look at the goddess Kali, for instance, who is actually manifested in this first chapter of the Chandi. They look at Kali and say, oh, the terrible Kali. But if you ever have an experience of Kali, if you ever have a vision of Kali, if she appears to you in a vision, not a picture or an image or something, but if Kali herself appears to you, you see she's the most beautiful thing that you have ever seen. You can't imagine anything so beautiful. Anything else looks insipid next to her beauty. And so you are terrible, and yet you are pleasing, the most pleasing of all pleasing things. And so then he ends by asking her to slay these two demons. And so then she does slay those demons. Let me just read a little bit to give a sense of it. The Rishi said, there the Devi, the goddess of delusion, extolled thus by Brahma, the creator, in order to awaken Vishnu for the destruction of Madhu and Kaitabha, drew herself out from his eyes, from his mouth, from his nostrils, from his arms, heart, and breast, and appeared in the sight of Brahma of inscrutable birth. So the goddess who was Yoga Nidra, she withdrew her power, she drew herself from the being of Vishnu, God. Janardana, Lord of the universe, quitted by her, rose up from his couch on the universal ocean and saw the two evil demons, Madhu and Kaitaba, and slew both of them. So that's the first story that Medhas tells to Suratha and Samadhi. But in the telling of it, he's telling of this, the great goddess, and of the nature of the great goddess. So that's just the introduction. Then the next story is the story of Mahishasura. And that is the story that gives us Durga Puja. And the image, which was right here behind me yesterday when we had the Durga Puja here in the Houston temple, the image was right here. We worshipped her. There's the image of Durga, and she's stabbing with her trident the demon Mahishasura. And so this tells the story of Mahishasura. Mahishasura means the demon who looked like a buffalo, who had the head of a buffalo. And one of the interesting things in Hindu mythology is that the demons are not all bad. There's no such thing as pure evil in Hinduism. Oftentimes we point to someone like Hitler as the example. This proves that there is pure evil, someone like Hitler. No, Hitler wasn't. Hitler was like you and me. Only he was more deluded than you and me. At least we like to think so. He was deluded, and he was overcome with power of the ego and of hatred. These were the things which ruled him. But he's just another being like one of us. All of us have the power to become a Hitler within us. God help us that we don't become that. But within all of us is the potential of a Hitler, as well as the potential of a St. Francis of Assisi. It depends on our choices and the actions, the repeated actions we do in life, which direction we go. And so when Mahishasura is slain, it's not the destruction of pure evil. It's the destruction of his demonic form so that the soul can be freed from its delusion in that form and can, in fact, it's said that the quickest way to attain to God is to become the enemy of God. Because if you hate God enough, you're always thinking of God. Hatred is a huge motivator. So it's considered a dangerous path because it's easy to get lost in hatred and not find your way out. But someone like Mahishasura is appreciated for his great valor and his great power, great strength. And he was a fitting foe for the goddess. And it was against him that her glory was manifested. And so in slaying him, she wasn't destroying him. She was destroying his demon form so that he could be liberated. Because to be killed at the hands of the divine is to be liberated. And so in the puja yesterday, there's a place where we make an offering also to Mahishasura, to the demon. So this is the real story of Durga, the story of Mahishasura. And so it comes in the second chapter. Let me just read a little bit of this. Again, I can't do too much of this because there's not time. But the Rishi said, telling this next story to the king and to the merchant who had come for help. Of yore, when Mahishasura was the lord of the Asuras, and Indra was the lord of the gods, there was a war between the gods and the Asuras for a full 100 years. In that the army of the Devas, the gods, was vanquished by the valorous Asuras. After conquering all of the Devas, Mahishasura became lord of heaven. That is, he replaced Indra, the lord of the gods. So this often happens in Hindu mythology, I should say. In Hindu mythology, the battle between the gods and the demons. In the Vedas, in the early part of the Vedas, there were two classes. There were the Devas and the Asuras, or the Suras and the Asuras. The Asuras or the Devas and the Asuras. They were two classes of divine beings. It was not that the Devas were the good ones and the Asuras were the bad ones. There were two different classes of divine beings. But over the ages, in the Vedas itself, by the late Vedic period, you find that the Asuras had been identified with the demons. That might have happened it would certainly happen for historical reasons, but the historical reason might be, we don't know, but it might be, this is a theory, that people who became enemies of the Vedic people, they worshipped the Asuras more, and the Vedic people tended to worship more the Devas. And so the gods of your enemies become the demons. You see that around the world. And so it may be that the Asuras became identified as demonic powers because of that. Because in the early Vedas, they were equal, just two classes of divine beings. But anyway, as I've said many times in the past, and have said this morning also, that one of the wonderful things about the Hindu mythology is that the demons are not pure evil. They also have great qualities. So here he begins by telling the story of Mahishasura, who defeated all of the gods, and he became the ruler of the universe. Then the vanquished Devas, headed by Brahma, the Lord of beings, that is the creator, went to the place where Shiva and Vishnu were. Shiva and Vishnu are both aspects of the supreme God, and Brahma is a secondary deity. So Brahma leads the other secondary deities to see Shiva and Vishnu to ask for help. The Devas described to them in detail what had happened, the story of their defeat wrought by Mahishasura. And they said, he, Mahishasura himself, has assumed the jurisdictions of the other gods. Thrown out from heaven by that evil-natured Mahisha, the hosts of Devas wander on the earth like mortals. All that has been done by the enemy of the Devas has been related to you both, and we have sought shelter under you both. May both of you be pleased to think out the means of his destruction. So having heard the words of the gods, Vishnu was angry, and also Shiva, and their faces became fierce with frowns. So again, remember, this is a mythology, but it's all meaningful. So again, if the problem with mythology is when you take it as literal historical fact, then the questions come up, well, why should Shiva and Vishnu get angry? We thought that they were God. It sounds like the Old Testament where God was always getting angry and jealous and everything. Well, no, again, it's a story to express the glory of the Divine Mother. And so it uses story as a means to express that which is beyond story. But also that which is beyond words. Then, again, when Shiva and Vishnu became angry hearing that this demon had usurped the place of the gods, then issued forth a great light from the face of Vishnu, who was full of intense anger, and from that of Brahma and Shiva too. So light came out of their faces. The spiritual light came out of their faces. From the bodies of Indra and the other gods also sprang forth a great light, and all this light united together. The Devas saw there a concentration of light like a mountain blazing excessively, pervading all the quarters with its flames. Then that unique light, produced from the bodies of all the Devas, pervading the three worlds with its luster, combined into one and became a female form, and thus came to be Durga. The idea being that the Divine Mother, God as Mother, is the power of all of the gods. Now again, the stories have to be understood properly. The idea is not that there was no Durga until the gods invoked her and then the gods made her out of bringing all of their power together. No, the idea is that the Divine Mother is the power of all of the gods, that she is the divine power itself. So she who is eternal, timeless, unborn, that she is the eternal power which the gods use for their own authority, the exercise of their own authority. That power belongs to the Divine Mother, and so here it was made manifested. By that which was Shiva's light, her face came into being. By Yama, the god of death, her hair. By Vishnu's light, her arms, and by Chandra's light, her two breasts. By Indra's light, her waist. By Varuna's light, her shanks and thighs, and by Earth's light, her hips. By Brahma's light, her feet came into being. By Surya, the sun. By Surya's light, her toes. By Vasu's light, her fingers. By Kubera's light, her nose. By Prajapati's light, her teeth came into being. And similarly, by Agni's light, her three eyes were formed. The light of the two sandhyas, that is, sunrise and sunset, became her eyebrows. The light of Vayu, her ears. The manifestation of the lights of other devas too contributed to the being of the auspicious Devi. Then looking at her who had come into being from the assembled lights of all the devas, the immortals who were oppressed by Muhica experienced joy. And then it tells about how she was armed, that Shiva took from his trident the power of his trident and gave to her as a trident. And Vishnu took the power of his discus and gave it to her, and that formed her discus. And so all of her weapons were the weapons of the gods. But again, the idea is that she is the power of all. That wherever you see any power, wherever you see any action, wherever you see any manifestation of energy, that is the power of the Divine Mother. So then it comes. Let me just read a little bit of the conclusion of the battle. It tells the story of the battle, but then in chapter 3 here, let's see, 33 through 44. No, that would be here. No, what happened? Yeah, here we are. So the Asura roared, intoxicated with his strength and valor, and hurled mountains against Chandika with his horns. Again, he has the head of a buffalo. And she, with showers of arrows, pulverized those mountains hurled at her, and spoke to him in flurried words, the color of her face accentuated with the intoxication of the divine drink, which she had been drinking. The Devi said, "Roar, roar, O fool, for a moment while I drink this wine," that is, the wine of immortality. "When you will be slain by me, the Devas will soon roar in this very place." The Rishi said, having exclaimed thus, she jumped and landed herself on that great Asura, pressed him on the neck with her foot, and struck him with her spear. And thereupon, caught up under her foot, Mahishasura half issued forth in his real form from his buffalo form, being completely overcome by the valor of the Devi. Fighting thus with his half-revealed form, the great Asura was laid by the Devi, who struck off his head with her great sword. Then, crying in consternation, the whole Asuri army perished, and all the hosts of Devas were in great exultation. With the great sages of heaven, the Devas praised the Devi. The Gandharva chiefs sang, and bevies of Apsaras, celestial damsels, danced. And so thus ends the story of Mahishasura. And that's what Durga Puja celebrates, the vanquishing of Mahishasura. And so then he tells the third and last story of the Chandi, of the Devi Mahatmyam, that is Medhas Muni, the sage Medhas, tells to the king Surata and to the merchant Samadhi the story of Shumbha and Nishumbha, two other demons who were defeated by the Devi. There's several wonderful hymns in the Chandi. One is the one I chanted a little bit from in the beginning, which is at the beginning of the Chandi, Brahma's hymn. And then in chapter 4, there's a beautiful hymn of the gods to the goddess. And then in chapter 5, we'll come to chapter 5, which is a chapter where she's extolled by the most non-dualistic of the hymns. Again, the whole text is based on the idea of non-dualism, Shakta Advaita, the non-dualism of the God as mother, with whom we are identical. In fact, in the puja which I did yesterday, there's a place where you invoke the living presence of Durga within the heart, as you do in any of our worships. But in this one, you meditate on Saham, I am she, I am she. There's no difference between the worshiper, no difference between anything and her. So in this chapter 5, let me just read a little bit of this. This is a very famous hymn, probably the most famous. Well, let's see, beginning with 8. The Devas said, so Deva Uchuhu, the gods extolling her, say, salutation to the goddess, to the Mahadevi, salutation always to her who is ever auspicious, salutation to her who is the primordial cause and the sustaining power. With attention we have made obeisance to her. Salutation to her who is terrible, to her who is eternal. Salutation to Gauri, the supporter of the universe. Salutation always to her who is of the form of the moon and moonlight and happiness itself, of the form of moon and moonlight because of her extraordinary beauty. We bow to her who is welfare. We make salutations to her who is prosperity and success. Salutation to the consort of Shiva, who is herself the good fortune, as well as the misfortune of kings. Salutation always to Durga, who takes one across the difficulties, the Durgati Nashini, she who takes us across the difficulties, who is essence, the essence of everything, who is the author of everything, who is knowledge of discrimination, who is blue-black and also smoke-like in complexion. We prostrate before her who is at once most gentle and most terrible. We salute her again and again. Salutations to her who is the support of the world. Salutations to the Devi who is of the form of volition, will. Salutations again and again to the Devi who in all beings is called Vishnu Maya, that is the divine power of God, Vishnu. Salutations again and again to the Devi who abides in all beings as consciousness, to the Devi who abides in all beings in the form of intelligence. So those of you who have any familiarity with the tradition, which is many of you, will recognize these as Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Chetanetya Bhidhiyate Namastasye 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Buddhirupena Samsthita. Namastasye, 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 namo namaha. So as I said, that's the most famous hymn, and it goes on like that. To the Devi who abides in all beings in the form of sleep. To the Devi who abides in all beings in the form of hunger. To the Devi who abides in all beings in the form of reflection, that is, mental reflection, thinking. To the Devi who abides in all beings in the form of power. To the Devi who abides in all beings in the form of thirst, in the form of forgiveness, in the form of genus, that is, categories, in the form of modesty, in the form of peace, in the form of faith. To the Devi who abides in all beings in the form of loveliness, of good fortune, of activity and memory and compassion, who abides as contentment, the form of the mother, but she who also abides in all beings in the form of error. That is Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Bhranti Rupena Samstita. She who abides in all beings in the form of error, in the form of mistake, in the form of delusion, and so on. The beautiful hymn continues. And so the battle ensues, and then the Shaktis of all of the gods join in. Time is up, so I won't go there. Every part of this is important. Every part is beautiful, but I'll just conclude the description of the third story by saying that eventually she tricks the gods by appearing in her lovely form, and that arouses the desire of Shumbha. And so he tells his messengers to go and bring her to him. And then she tricks him by saying that she would be glad to come, but she can't because she had made a promise. And so I won't go into the whole story. But then Shumba himself comes to fight with her. That she had made a promise that she would only join in love with the person who defeated her in battle. And so then, with that trick, he thinks, "Oh, a mere woman, I can easily defeat her. I've defeated all of the gods." And so that is the ruse that she uses. It's also in this third part, the battle of Shumba Nishumba, that Rakta Bija makes his appearance, the famous demon Rakta Bija, where whenever he's cut and blood flows out from his body, then from every drop of blood, another demon appears. And so it seems hopeless that you cut him, you slay him, and out of his blood, countless more demons are born. And so finally, the goddess, she drinks his blood and eats up all of the demons so that their blood is not spilled. She drinks the blood and eats the demons. So a gory story, but it's said to be that Rakta Bija is of the nature of desire, that one desire leads to thousands of desires. Every desire leads to countless more desires. And so the way to overcome desire is to swallow all of them, not to fight them one by one. If you try to fight them one by one, you find every one that you fight with, it gives place to even more desires. And so Rakta Bija has to be swallowed. That's the only way to overcome him. So chapter 11, the praise of the gods. They praise the goddess. So chapters 5 through 10 tell of this battle. She's the Shumba, the last of the demons. Nishumba is first killed, and then Shumba is killed in chapter 10. And then chapter 11, the praise of the Devas, one of the other beautiful hymns in the Chandi. And chapter 12 is what they call Arthavada. That is, the Devi tells that one who reads this hymn on a regular basis will overcome all fear, will overcome all difficulties. And so that is why many people, including many of our Swamis, like Swami Tathagatanandaji, read the Chandi every day because it gives, the reading of it itself gives great strength. Not by a magic power, but because of thinking in these terms, putting the minds in these terms, it naturally gives great strength, and the strength to overcome difficulties. And it also is a way of supplicating the Divine Mother herself. Chapter 13, the last chapter, Then Surata, the king, and Samadhi, the merchant, they practice, after hearing these stories from the sage Sumedhas, they practice austerities for 3 years. And at the end of their austerities of 3 years, they attain to the vision of the Divine Mother. She comes to them in her divine form, reveals herself to them, and tells them that she's pleased with their austerities and says that she will give each of them a boon. And so it's interesting, and this is, I'm coming to the conclusion now of the talk, because this is the conclusion of the Chandi. Surata, the king, he asks for his kingdom back. And so he is granted by the goddess. He returns to his kingdom and is welcomed, and he regains control over his kingdom in this life. But in the next life, he becomes, after several manvantaras, long ages, he's reborn again. In the interval, he resides in a high heaven, but then he's reborn as Savarni, the Manu, the Lord of the ruler, the spiritual ruler over creation. And so he resides for long eon as Savarni, the Manu of that eon of creation. Savarni means he who is the son of Savarna. Savarna is the one of the wives of Surya, the sun himself. So the son Vivaswan, his wife Savarna, she who is with golden color, she gives birth to Manu, and he becomes the Manu for the age. But then Samadhi, the merchant, who's a Vaishya, that is of a lower caste, he's the one who attains to dispassion. Of course, Surata, he had learned great things too, but he still had a desire for kingdom. And so that desire was fulfilled, so that after becoming Savarni, the Manu, in that life he attains to wisdom. He rules over the eon, and then he attains to liberation. But Samadhi, then and there, understands the meaning of dispassion and non-attachment. So he prays for enlightenment. And so he is given then and there, and when he sees the Divine Mother before him, she grants him self-realization. He attains to enlightenment and becomes eternally fulfilled. So it's a wonderful thing that in the Devi tradition, there's not this idea, which is there in the much of the Brahminical tradition, that only a Brahmin is fit for the highest state. And so if it had been part of that tradition, then Samadhi would have been the one who still had a desire to go back and make money and everything. And the story would have ended differently. But here, the Divine Mother, she is the ruler of all. She's manifest in all. And she gives liberation to anyone who wants it, of any community. And so it ends with his attaining to illumination, and he of a high caste, of a Kshatriya caste, attains to kingdom. He eventually attains illumination also, but after satisfying his desire for kingdom. So that is in essence, that is the Chandi. It's an extraordinary scripture, and one, again, which at first blush, for someone not familiar with the tradition, looks strange with all of the battles and the killing and slaying and all of that. But by reading it, that brings great power, great energy, and the ability to conquer all obstacles, because that is what is manifested here. So with that, I will conclude. If there's one question, I'll take one question. There's not time for more. There are no questions. So then I'll give announcements and then a closing chant. So for the announcements, we will continue with our usual activities. We had a wonderful celebration yesterday of the Durga Puja, and now we will continue with regular activities. On Tuesday, we'll have the Bhagavad Gita class at 7:30 in the evening, live streamed. On Thursday, we will have the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna class at 11 in the morning, live streamed. And next Sunday, I will speak, and I believe my talk next Sunday is on the Jivatma, I think so, the Jiva, in the series on basic concepts. So again, we're doing 3 series right now. One series is on gods and goddesses, explaining the different gods and goddesses. Another, the series which we did today, small Vedantic texts. And a third series, which is the basic concepts of Vedanta. So next Sunday will be the Jiva, the individual soul. So with that, I'll give a closing chant. Om Dyo Shantihi Antariksham Shantihi Prithvi Shantihi Apashantihi Oshadaya Shantihi Vanaspataya Shantihi Vishwe Deva Shantihi Brahma Shantihi Sarvam Shantihi Shantireva Shantihi Sama Shantiredhi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace is in the heavens, peace is in the sky, peace is on earth, peace in the waters, peace in the plants and the trees. The gods are peace. Peace is the nature of truth. All is peace. Peace alone, peace. May that peace, real peace, be with us all. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all the beings of the universe.